Canada just hit another population surge while housing is still scarce, wages feel stuck, and the jobless rate just climbed to a multi-year high. Is our immigration system fueling prosperity or spreading Canadians too thin? Tonight we unpack the facts, the myths, and what the data really says. Chapter 1. What's really changed in immigration policy? For decades, Canada's immigration story has been told as one of triumph, a proud narrative of a nation built by newcomers and sustained by their energy and contributions. Governments used to tout rising immigration targets as evidence of progress, proof that Canada was open, diverse, and forward-looking. But in recent years, cracks in that story have appeared, and Ottawa has been forced to make changes that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. In 2025, the government rolled out a new immigration levels plan that marked a dramatic shift. Permanent resident admissions, which had been climbing steadily and were celebrated for hitting historic highs, were now deliberately tapered down. Instead of continuing above the 400,000 mark, the plan called for 395,000 in 2025, dropping further to 365,000 by 2027. This wasn't about shutting doors, it was about slowing the pace so the country could breathe. What truly sets this plan apart is its treatment of temporary residents. For the first time, Ottawa admitted that temporary residents, international students, temporary foreign workers, and refugee claimants were not just a side note, but a central factor in shaping Canada's demographics and economy. These groups had quietly swelled to around 7.5% of the population, creating pressure points across housing and services. The new plan aims to cut that share down to 5% by 2026, an ambitious move that signals the government's recognition of just how disruptive unbalanced growth had become. The message is clear: the era of unlimited inflows is over. The recalibration also reflects a broader political reality. Canadians are increasingly uneasy about the link between immigration and their own daily struggles to find affordable homes, to secure medical appointments, to afford groceries on stagnant wages. By acknowledging these frustrations and connecting immigration policy to them, Ottawa is hoping to restore trust. Still, critics say this doesn't go far enough. They argue that even with reduced targets, growth will continue to outpace housing construction and infrastructure upgrades, meaning Canadians will keep feeling squeezed. Others counter that slowing immigration risks long-term economic stagnation, leaving industries short of workers and failing to replace retirees. At its core, the new plan is a balancing act. It's about sending a signal that Canada still values immigration, but is no longer willing to chase record numbers at any cost. It's about admitting that unchecked growth comes with consequences, and that for immigration to remain politically and socially viable, it must be tied to what the country can realistically sustain. In this sense, the government is trying to preserve the immigration system by moderating it, ensuring it doesn't collapse under the weight of its own success. Chapter 2. How big is the population surge? Canada's population growth over the past few years has been nothing short of staggering. In 2024 alone, the country added approximately 744,000 people, representing a 1.8% increase in a single year. To understand the scale of this, consider that over the past 2 years, more than 1.5 million people have been added to the population, equivalent to building a new province practically overnight. Few other developed countries have experienced growth on this scale, and certainly not at such speed. While it reflects Canada's global appeal, it also magnifies the pressure on housing, healthcare, and public services. What makes this surge particularly striking is that it wasn't driven primarily by permanent residents, as in past decades. Instead, non-permanent residents, international students, temporary workers, and refugee claimants have fueled much of the increase. These groups don't just add to population totals, they concentrate in specific cities, amplifying their impact. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, and Calgary have seen massive inflows, driving up rental demand, straining local hospitals, and crowding transit systems. The result is uneven. Smaller towns remain underpopulated while urban centres buckle under the load. For policymakers, this surge has been both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, rapid growth ensures Canada doesn't face the same demographic decline seen in countries with aging populations and shrinking workforces. More people mean more tax revenue, more consumers, and a more dynamic labour force. On the other hand, when growth outpaces infrastructure, it stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like chaos. Canadians standing in overcrowded emergency rooms or bidding against dozens of others for a small apartment don't see the abstract benefits of demographic growth. They see hardship. Public opinion has shifted accordingly. While many Canadians remain proud of their country's diversity, they are increasingly skeptical about whether the system is working in their favour. Surveys show growing concern about the pace of change, with residents of major cities voicing frustration that their quality of life is being eroded. Politicians who once competed to promise higher immigration levels now find themselves promising caps and controls. The surge is real, and while it brings opportunities, it has forced the country to confront its limits. Chapter 3. Housing, Supply, Rents and Reality. Housing has become the most visible pressure point in Canada's immigration debate. While population growth surged, housing supply lagged far behind. Experts estimate that Canada needs millions of additional housing units by 2030 to restore affordability, but current building rates fall far short of that target. High interest rates, labour shortages in construction, and lengthy municipal approval processes have slowed down projects, leaving the market perpetually undersupplied. This mismatch between demand and supply is at the root of the crisis. In 2024, the national rental vacancy rate rose slightly to 2.2%, up from 1.5% the previous year. While this sounds like progress, it's still below the long-term average of 2.7% and nowhere near enough to ease affordability. Rents continued to rise across the country, reaching record highs in major cities. Families who once dreamed of home ownership found themselves permanently priced out, while young Canadians increasingly gave up hope of leaving their parents' homes. Immigration didn't create the housing crisis, but it poured fuel on a fire that was already burning. The problem is structural. For decades, Canada underbuilt housing, particularly affordable rental units. When population growth accelerated dramatically, the system had no cushion. Every newcomer adds demand, but supply takes years to catch up. Developers face high borrowing costs, shortages of skilled trades, and endless red tape from municipalities. Even when projects are approved, they often stall due to labour or material shortages. The result is a supply gap so wide that no short-term immigration adjustment can close it. For ordinary Canadians, the housing crisis isn't about abstract numbers. It's about lived experience. It's the couple forced to spend 60% of their income on rent. It's the young professional moving back in with their parents because they can't afford to live independently. It's the immigrant family crammed into a basement unit because there are no alternatives. These stories fuel resentment, and when Canadians look for someone to blame, immigration becomes the easiest target. Yet the truth is more complicated. Immigration intensifies demand, but the real culprit is decades of insufficient building. Unless Canada dramatically increases construction, even reduced immigration levels won't make homes affordable. The solution isn't to close the doors, but to open up the cranes and bulldozers. Until then, the housing crisis will remain the lens through which Canadians judge immigration policy, fairly or not. Chapter 4. Jobs, Wages, and Productivity. The labour market adds another layer of complexity. In August 2025, Canada lost approximately 65,500 jobs, and unemployment rose to 7.1%. the highest since 2016 outside of the pandemic years. For workers, these numbers felt like confirmation that the economy is faltering. At the same time, wages have been rising modestly, but inflation continues to erode those gains. Many Canadians feel poorer even though their paychecks are technically larger. This creates the perception of stagnation, fueling frustration. Immigration plays a complicated role here. On one hand, it fills critical labor shortages in industries like healthcare, agriculture, and construction. Hospitals rely on internationally trained nurses, farms depend on seasonal workers, and construction projects often employ immigrants. Without them, these sectors would collapse. On the other hand, some Canadians feel direct competition in entry-level job markets, particularly in retail, hospitality, and gig work. This fuels resentment, even if the data shows immigration isn't dramatically depressing wages overall. The deeper issue is productivity. Canada has long struggled with low productivity compared to other advanced economies. Immigration boosts total GDP, but it doesn't necessarily improve GDP per capita unless productivity improves. Too often, skilled immigrants arrive with advanced degrees but end up driving taxis or working retail because their credentials aren't recognized. This wastes talent and prevents the economy from fully benefiting from their skills. It's a failure not of immigration itself, but of integration and recognition systems. Businesses also share responsibility. Many companies take advantage of an expanded labor pool to hire cheaply rather than invest in innovation, training, or technology. This keeps costs low in the short term, but undermines long-term prosperity. Immigration alone cannot solve Canada's economic challenges. It must be paired with policies that drive productivity, encourage investment, and ensure workers, both Canadian and immigrant, are in jobs that maximize their potential. The narrative that immigration is dragging down wages oversimplifies reality. The real drag is a lack of innovation, infrastructure, and training. If Canada improves these, immigration can be an enormous strength. If it doesn't, immigration will continue to feel like a burden rather than a boost. Productivity is the key, and until it improves, the benefits of immigration will remain limited and unevenly distributed. Chapter 5. Students and temporary residents, caps and consequences. International students have become one of the most visible faces of Canada's immigration system. For years, colleges and universities recruited them aggressively, relying on their tuition to stay afloat. But by 2024, the numbers had grown so large that they overwhelmed local housing markets and education systems. Ottawa responded with a dramatic step, capping new study permits at 437,000 in 2025, about 10% fewer than the previous year. This move was both symbolic and practical, aimed at restoring balance and credibility. For students, the cap created new uncertainty. Securing a study permit became harder, and opportunities to transition into permanent residency became less predictable. For institutions, the cap was a financial blow. Many smaller colleges and private institutions had built entire business models around endless streams of international tuition. Now they face the prospect of cutbacks, layoffs, and closures. Employers, too, felt the shift, as international students often filled part-time jobs in retail and hospitality, sectors already struggling with labor shortages. The cap was part of the larger effort to reduce temporary residents overall. Ottawa's goal of bringing their share down to 5% of the population by 2026 is a sweeping change. Politically, it resonated. Canadians saw it as proof that the government was listening to concerns about runaway growth. But the consequences are complex. Reducing student inflows may relieve some pressure on housing in the short term, but it also risks damaging Canada's reputation as a global education hub. Families abroad may look elsewhere if Canada appears unwelcoming. The student cap is a microcosm of the immigration debate. It shows how deeply intertwined immigration is with every part of society, from education to labor to housing. Reducing numbers eases some pressures but creates new ones elsewhere. The challenge is finding the right balance without undermining Canada's long-term goals. Students bring not just tuition but also talent and innovation potential. If they are turned away, Canada risks losing more than just money. In the end, the cap buys time for the system to catch up. It doesn't solve the housing crisis and it doesn't fix underfunded schools, but it shows that policymakers are willing to act. Whether that action is bold enough or too blunt remains to be seen. Chapter 6. What would balance actually look like? Balance is the word everyone uses, but few define clearly. In practice, it means aligning immigration with the country's actual capacity to absorb newcomers. That starts with housing. If Canada needs millions of new homes to restore affordability, immigration targets should reflect the pace of construction. Bringing in more people than you can house is a recipe for resentment. It also means addressing regional imbalances. Newcomers cluster in big cities because that's where jobs and networks are. But smaller towns and rural areas often need workers the most. Incentives to attract immigrants to these regions could reduce pressure on urban centers while revitalizing struggling communities. Without such policies, growth will remain uneven, fueling frustration in some places while leaving others untouched. Productivity is another cornerstone of balance. Immigration should not just expand the population, but strengthen the economy's capacity to create wealth. That means targeting industries with high growth potential, technology, green energy, advanced healthcare, and ensuring skilled immigrants are matched to jobs that use their talents. Credential recognition reforms are critical here. Canada cannot afford to waste the skills of doctors, engineers, and scientists by leaving them in survival jobs. Temporary resident caps should be treated as a pressure valve rather than a permanent fix. They provide short-term relief to housing and labor markets, but should not undermine long-term objectives. Immigration must remain flexible, adapting to changing conditions rather than being rigidly set in stone. Finally, balance requires honesty. Canadians need to hear the full story, not just the benefits of immigration, but also the challenges. Sugarcoating the issues undermines trust and fuels backlash. Success should be measured not only by how many people Canada admits, but by how well they integrate, how affordable housing remains, how wages grow, and how communities thrive. Done right, immigration can remain a cornerstone of prosperity. Done wrong, it risks tearing at the social fabric. Balance is not about choosing sides, it is about ensuring the system works for both newcomers and Canadians alike. If you want immigration policy that protects affordability and strengthens Canada's future, share this video, hit like, and drop a comment. What single change would you make first? Housing, caps, or productivity? Subscribe for the next deep dive where we test 3 reform scenarios and show who wins, who loses, and why.